Well, hello, and thank you very much for clicking on this video today. So today, this is a really sad story, but it's a sad story that I've kept my eye on for some time, just to kind of see more details coming out. So this is a story of how US servicemen in the UK basically avoid the British judicial system after they've been accused of sexual assault. US personnel have been accused of sexually assaulting people, not just in the UK, but in many countries where they have bases as well. And so have UK soldiers been accused as well. So it's not a unique position so it's not unique to them. But this particular article, which has done some great reporting by The Guardian, which we're going to go through, kind of outlines not only that local authorities pretty much caved in to American demands, but how the US military court system is not fit for purpose and is clearly set up to benefit and protect the US servicemen who have been sexually assaulting people. So let's go into it. So we're starting from the top, and as always, I will post a link to the article itself so you can read through the entire thing and see some of the other reporting that's been done on this subject. So, minutes after fleeing the home of an American airman, Rebecca called 999 in tears to report that he had raped her. She recalls vomiting at the police station in Suffolk as she described being repeatedly and violently attacked. Officers took her to a sexual assault referral centre for an immediate examination. There, a nurse measured and photographed her injuries, including bruises and bite marks on her neck. "I didn't feel like I was human," said Rebecca, whose name has been changed to protect her identity. "I know that sounds really extreme, but I genuinely looked in the mirror and didn't recognise myself." Over the following days, Rebecca, then a 20-year-old British midwifery student, was interviewed by local police detectives. She handed over her phone and laptop as evidence and was given a criminal reference number and appointed an independent sexual advice advisor at ISVA to help with the legal process she assumed would take place under normal rules of prosecutions in England and Wales. Yet normal rules do not apply to men like Tyrion Davis, who was then a 22-year-old senior airman in the US Air Force base at RAF at Lakenheath, an American military base. Rebecca alleged that he raped her in June of 2020, while he was off duty at his home in Brandon, a small market town in rural Suffolk. 20 days after the Suffolk police commenced their investigation, the force decided to cede control of the case to the US Air Force. That decision meant that Davis would avoid British justice system and a possible trial before a jury in a British Crown Court. Instead, he was prosecuted in a military trial or a court-martial at RAF at Lakenheath. So we can see how already, obviously the Suffolk police did not admit to this, but I think it's fair to speculate and to say they ceded control because the US military put pressure on them to do so, because as we will see, it is much the US military tribunals that this man was put under was much more lenient and much more in favour of him than a normal British Crown Court with an actual jury. So, let's continue. By the time of the trial in June 2022, the case against Davis had expanded to include a similar sexual assault allegation from a second woman, his estranged wife, Emily. Davis insisted his sexual encounters with Rebecca and Emily, both British women, had been consensual. However, he was convicted of sexually assaulting Emily, whose name has been changed to protect her identity. It is unclear why the offence, which involved non-consensual penetrative sex, was prosecuted by the military as sexual assault. In the criminal justice system for England and Wales, this kind of offence would more than likely have been charged as rape. So even then, you can see how in the US military system, it was charged at a much lower level. Davis was acquitted on 10 further counts of sexual assault and abusive sexual contact, and 2 counts of sexual assault against Rebecca and Emily. In interviews with The Guardian, this is coming from, and kudos to them for doing this reporting, Rebecca and Emily spoke of their horrific allegations against the US airman and the traumatic experience of giving evidence against him at a court-martial. Rebecca, who now works at the Fleet NHS, said she had discovered about a week before the court-martial that the jury panel would be composed entirely of Davis's military peers, rather than members of the public. It's like if I did something wrong outside of work, having all my nursing colleagues be on the jury, she said. It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense. She's completely right. If it would be the equivalent of if someone accused a police officer of attacking them or something like that, and then for the jury, it was all police officers that they worked with. It's like, oh, come on. This is so clearly biased. The jury system has its faults for sure, but one of the benefits of taking random people in society to adjudicate cases is that there's a good chance that hopefully they will be fair. People coming from different backgrounds who don't have connections to the people involved in the case. So Rebecca met Davis when she was 18. 4 months after he arrived at RAF Lakenheath in June 2017. He was an aircraft metals craftsman in the 48th Equipment Maintenance Squadron. In February 2018, Rebecca introduced Davis, who was originally from California, to her friend Emily. 10 months later, Davis, then 20, and Emily, then 18, got married. The marriage was short-lived and ended when Emily left him in July 2019. However, Rebecca had considered Davis a good friend. He had met her family, stayed at their home, and joined them for roast dinners. In June 2020, at the end of the COVID lockdown, Rebecca asked Davis if she could stay in one of the spare rooms at his house in Brandon, which is close to the airbase. Her flatmates had moved out of her university accommodation and the Wi-Fi had stopped working properly. Rebecca alleged that Davis smoked marijuana before attacking her within hours of her arrival on 8th of June 2020. I thought I was going to die, she says. She said Davis had pulled her onto his bed before assaulting her. He bit me. I couldn't see anything because it was just pitch black, and I didn't know the layout of the room. I just kind of froze. Everything happened. It was rape. It was sexual assault, and the only time he stopped was when I vomited everywhere from stress. Rebecca alleged Davis then pushed her into the shower and attempted to assault her before she escaped to the downstairs bedroom, where she barricaded the door shut with her suitcases. The full horror of the alleged attack, she said, became clear when she saw bruises and bite marks on her neck in the morning and realised that this wasn't a bad dream. Rebecca tried the front door but found it was locked. She messaged a friend to say she needed somewhere safe to stay, while considering jumping out of her window to escape. She alleged, Davis burst into her bedroom and raped her again. I begged him to let me go. Unlock the door, please, just let me go. And he eventually did. I was absolutely hysterical, she said. He left the room and I was like, what do I grab? I launched all my stuff in the car and started driving. In the car, Rebecca then says that she phoned a friend who encouraged her to call 999. A court-martial document described Rebecca as audibly distraught and overcome with emotion in the call. The body camera footage from the Suffolk police officer who met her a short time later showed that she was visibly shaken, agitated, and at some points crying, and appeared to be under extreme stress, the document noted. At a local police station, an officer told Rebecca they had run out of the rape kits used to preserve evidence, owing to a spate of reported assaults. She was then taken to Harbour Centre, a sexual assault referral centre in Norwich, where intimate photographs and swabs were taken of her injuries and documented. Rebecca surrendered her clothing as evidence and left wearing clothes donated by a charity. She returned to the centre a few days later for a formal interview, this time by a police officer from the Norfolk Police. Although Suffolk Police remained the investigating force, days later, however, that changed. So, we'll then move on to the next part. So, on the 15th of June 2020, 6 days before Rebecca's initial report, she said she received an unexpected phone call from Suffolk Police. An officer informed her that the Americans had made a request for the US military to take jurisdiction over the case, and that the transfer would be a quicker route to justice. Rebecca said a similar argument was made to her by her ISVA, a specialist who provides advice and support to victims in England and Wales. She told me the CPS might not take the case, Rebecca said of the ISVA. If they do take it, it's a minimum of 2 years until the court case, she then said. The Americans, they want to take it on. They've said it'll be 6 months for a court-martial. Which one would you prefer? In the traumatic days after the alleged attack, the promise of a faster trial was compelling. Rebecca had already put her midwifery degree on hold while trying to navigate the complex legal systems. She was told there was a 2-year waiting list for mental health services on the NHS, but the Americans could offer her support more quickly. Rebecca also recalls her ISVA giving her statistics about how few rape cases are prosecuted by the CPS and how long it takes to get to court. In my head, I was thinking, okay, if I go the American route, it's quicker, and I continue my midwifery, and also they're going to give me support. Rebecca said she was also warned by ISVA that Davis could try to leave the UK before facing trial in an English court. 9 months earlier, I think we all remember this one, and Sokolis, American, I think it's pronounced, an American intelligence official had fled the UK after killing 19-year-old motorcyclist Harry Dunn in a road collision outside the US military base in RAF Crowton. Rebecca agreed to transfer the case and was formally handed over to the Americans on the 29th of June 2020. However, it was only later, she said, she then realised the full implications of that decision. The promised 6-month timetable of a court-martial stretched to 2 years, so basically the same time that a British court would probably have taken, forcing Rebecca to drop out of her midwife degree. Unlike hundreds of rape and sexual assault victims who give evidence in UK courts each year, Rebecca could not testify from behind a screen. She would have to do so in a small courtroom at the military base, so all the questioning would be in front of him, she said. Rebecca did not meet her US Air Force appointed lawyer until weeks before the trial, when she was invited to the airbase to see the layout of the courtroom. Days before she was due to testify, Rebecca received advice about how she should approach the court-martial. She says, "My legal representation contacted me and said, 'What are you wearing?' she recalled, and I was like, 'I don't know, probably a suit or something.' 'Whatever you do, don't wear red lipstick,' I was told. 'Don't wear anything red. Wear black, white. If anything, wear white because it's more angelic.'" And the sad truth, and I will reveal a little bit about myself, is I was on a jury trial for a sexual assault case, for attempted sexual assault, and some of my fellow jury members were initially incredibly dismissive of some of the witnesses because of what they were wearing. They held the opinion that just because some of the witnesses were not wearing like fancy suits, that they were kind of scummy. And so people do jump to those kind of opinions of what people wear, not just for witnesses but for victims of sexual assault. So it is unfortunate that is a very real thing. Rebecca added, "That's always stuck with me and my family. Why does it matter what you're wearing?" But it obviously did. When it came to a court-martial evidence, Rebecca, who was short-sighted, took off her glasses so she didn't have to see Davis, who was meters away. "It was probably one of the worst days of my life," she said, "because he was right there, and I thought, if I can't see him, I'm safer. I know it sounds stupid, but I took my glasses off and answered questions." Much of the trial was a blur for Rebecca, who, despite the assurances she had received, wasn't able to get any mental health support. "The only way I was going to get through every day was trying to ignore exactly what had happened, because it had such a massive mental impact on me. And in the court case, I feel like I froze, because in my head he didn't exist anymore for my own protection, and him just being there, I just instantly went into fight, flight, freeze, and I just froze." She added, "In the courtroom, my body just kind of shut down. I think I answered yes, no, and tried my hardest because he was there. I was in shock." Emily's experience on the witness stand was not dissimilar. Unlike Rebecca, who initially dealt with Suffolk police after the open investigation following her 999 call, Emily's allegations against her estranged husband were handled entirely by the US military. Emily reported her allegations to the US Air Force Office of Special Investigations in September 2020, after Rebecca got in touch to explain that the investigators were looking into her allegation of rape against Davis. Emily accused Davis of sexually assaulting her on multiple occasions in 2018 and 2019, including by allegedly forcing her into sexual acts in the presence of others. She also alleged she had once become afraid of her life after Davis during consensual sex. He strangled her until she began to lose consciousness and her vision became blurry. However, it was another allegation that proved pivotal during the court-martial. On the night of July 2019, while she was in bed together, Davis wanted to have sex with Emily, but she said no. She pushed his hand away and told him no several times and turned her body away from him. "I said no because I didn't want to," she recalled. "He cuddled up to me and I was like, no, go away. He kept trying, I kept saying no, and in the end he just rolled onto my back, Sorry, he just rolled me onto my back and completely ignored me. It was awful. I was crying. He just didn't care. So, Facebook messages disclosed during the trial showed that Emily told Davis on the 10th of August 2019 that she couldn't get over what happened, adding, "I said stop," more than once. And there are some added bits to this which go into much more detail about what he did, but to be blunt, I'm not going to read it because it's really repulsive. And if you really want to know, you can look at the article and read it for yourself. Davis replied, I never said you didn't say stop. I said you didn't say it. I said you didn't say it like you meant it. You say stop a lot. Sick. I'm not blaming you for what I did. In a lengthy message, Emily described the impact of the assault, saying, I'm still getting nightmares from it. Me saying no actually meant no. Publicly available documents about the court-martial proved only a partial snapshot of the case and did not include a full account of the US Airman's defense, including in relation to accounts over which he was acquitted. One document shows his lawyers argue that Davis maintained his relationships with Emily and Rebecca consisted of consensual encounters. They accused Emily of telling repeated lies and argued that her testimony showed a pattern of a young married couple exploring their sexual boundaries. While Emily was often initially uninterested or averse to sexual activities, the lawyer argued she eventually agreed to participate. Now, this is the kicker. This is where it starts to become a real problem. I mean, there are problems already. The fact that there was no screen, which is there so that people that have been sexually assaulted don't have to be stared down by the people that did it to them. So it kind of helps to protect their mental health. The fact that this wasn't available is disgusting in of itself. But court-martials on US military bases can be hard for the public to access, requiring special permission to get into fortified bases. There are no publicly available transcripts of the proceedings, and therefore no records of the cross-examinations Emily and Rebecca were subjected to. Emily recalls giving evidence over 2 days when she was 5 months pregnant as very intensive and very invasive. I was so stressed and emotionally distraught, she said. Court documents show Davis's lawyer argued Emily had fabricated the allegations after returning from a holiday to Ibiza in July 2019 when she slept with one of Davis's US Air Force colleagues. His lawyer claimed that Emily wanted to change the narrative from unfaithful wife to victim of sexual assault because it seemed more palatable reason for her to leave her husband. Emily admitted that during cross-examination she initially lied about the affair, but said it did not change the fact that Davis sexually assaulted her. The only reason that it was even brought up was because they were trying to call into question my character. But even if I had been having an affair the whole time, it wouldn't justify what he did. Court papers reveal that Emily was also questioned more than 15 times about the fact that she had reported alleged sexual assaults only after Rebecca got in touch with her. Emily told The Guardian that she had feared she would not be believed, which is very common. Like, if you look at the statistics of how many rape and sexual assault cases are actually taken up by the Crown Prosecution Service, it's pretty depressing. You know, a lot of people just don't report it or are very reluctant to report it because of things like shame or just more practical issue of they probably won't be believed, or the CPS just won't take it, just won't pursue it. So, she then says, it took me a while to realise that what he was doing actually wasn't right. And then at that point, I felt like I had been too long. She said, it was my word against his, and no one would believe me. Emily's fear that Emily's attacker's word would be believed over hers will be familiar to many victims of sexual violence. In her case, there was an added complication that the jury comprised of his fellow airmen at the base, who, even if they believe that they're impartial, couldn't have been. Because people in organisations, whether it be the military, the police, anything like that, do have a vested interest in looking out for their own. It's just a sad fact, which is why normal courts don't do this kind of thing, because it's so bleeding obvious. So for the most part, all the military panel sided with Davis over the 2 women. He was acquitted of 6 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of sexual assault relating to Rebecca's allegations. He was also acquitted of 4 further sexual assaults and 1 assault against Emily. Davis was found not guilty of 1 charge of wrongful use of marijuana. Davis was convicted of 1 count of sexual assault under Article 120 of the US Uniform Code of Military Justice. It was a charge described not as rape, but, and I quote, penetrating her vulva with his penis without consent, which is very clearly rape. I mean, come on. I can't think of off the top of my head, I can't think of a more apt definition of what rape is. And it related to the incident in which he subsequently admitted in a Facebook message, "I never said you didn't say stop." So the article then goes on to mention that this case echoes that involving another US fighter pilot, Jacob Wolfson, also based at RAF Lakenheath, who avoided the British justice system after strangling a woman in his apartment in Cambridge city centre in 2023. He was acquitted of a separate charge of sexual assault relating to an allegation of non-consensual penetration that, as in Davis' case, was not charged as rape. So we can already, just between these two, we can see a pattern of US military personnel basically being let off or being given lesser charges when what they were doing is very clearly rape. Wolfson's victim, Sarah Steele, an academic at Cambridge University, spoke to The Guardian last month about her degrading ordeal at the court-martial, prompting widespread cross-party concern in Westminster. David Lammy, the then Deputy Prime Minister, asked the US government to give a full account of what happened in Steele's case. However, The Guardian's continuing investigation into British crimes prosecuted in US military tribunal courts suggests her case is far from an isolated one, amid questions over the fairness of the US court-martial system. Had it not been for the Facebook messages in which Davis admitted to non-consensual sex, Emily believes that he wouldn't have been convicted of anything. It was my word against his. The only reason he got convicted of that one charge is because he admitted to it in text messages, so they could prove it. For Rebecca, the conviction of Emily's complaint brought some measure of relief despite the acquittal in relation to her own allegations. At the time of the court case, my mental health was on the floor. I think that's the lowest I've ever been in my life. I've come to accept what happened. I did my part. I tried to protect other people. Davis later brought an appeal in January 2024. A US Air Force appeals court upheld the conviction. Contacted by The Guardian, Davis's prosecution spokesperson for the US Air Force military police said that as an investigative agency, it could not respond about decisions around jurisdictions, charges, and legal proceedings. Questions regarding this issue should be directed to the proper authorities. In this case, local police should be better equipped to respond, they said. So basically, they're just deciding, yeah, we're not going to say anything. No comment. We're going to wash our hands of this. We're not going to respond to your questions about our system, which is very clearly biased. But anyway, Suffolk Police said in a statement that the jurisdiction over prosecuting Davis's case was transferred to the USAF with the agreement of the victim, following discussion with her, an independent advisor, and the Air Force Legal Services. But there is a real problem with that, which is obviously the woman, Rebecca, is not a lawyer. She's not an expert in US military legal proceedings. How would she have known what was going to happen? She couldn't. And from what she has said, it sounds like all the advice that she was given was terrible, absolutely terrible, not accurate to what actually would happen. And you have to really question how independent was the advice given to her. So, Suffolk Police did not directly respond to Rebecca's complaint that she was not fully informed of the implications of her decision. They said, "We are committed to ensuring our actions continue to be led by the wishes and best interests of the victims and are keen to understand examples where this is not the experience of victims." A spokesperson for Norfolk Police, who employs the ISVA, who advised Rebecca, did address her complaint, saying, "We recognise the victim's lived experience and are sorry that she feels she was not fully informed about the aspects of military court process before making a decision. We will reflect on the circumstances of the case to ensure that victims are given the clearest possible information to help them make informed decisions." Davis did not respond to requests for comment. Shocker. So, under the criminal justice system in England and Wales, the offence for which Davis was convicted would likely have been charged as rape. Sentencing would have been determined by a judge following the guidelines ranging of 4 to 19 years, with a statutory maximum of life imprisonment. The military system, through which Davis was convicted could have imposed a sentence of up to 30 years, Davis's defense lawyer instead recommending 30 years of confinement. The decision on what would make an appropriate sentence was left to the same panel of officers and airmen who served as the jury. So not only are the officers and airmen who work alongside this guy the people that decide whether they're guilty or not, they're also the people that decide the sentence. So even if they decide that someone is guilty, they can basically give them an incredibly light sentence, which is what they did. After deliberating for more than 2.5 hours, they settled on 10 months, which is nothing. Absolutely nothing for what he was convicted of doing. Davis was also dishonorably discharged from the Air Force and placed on a sex offender registry, in which his status is now listed as absconded. So to kind of end on something, he could have had 30 years, but he got 10 months. Emily said 10 months is a slap on the wrist, which it is. It absolutely is. And so there's a lot of information there, so let's just try and summarize as best as we can. So this is not just a problem in the UK. I have read documents, not documents exactly, but I have read good reporting of US personnel doing similar things in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places, and receiving the victims receiving basically no justice of any kind. And what is disturbing is not only is the US military court procedures completely ridiculous, the fact that the same people that other servicemen and women presumably are basically the judge and the jury is ridiculous, and the fact that the way that they do these trials means that the victim basically has no protection and basically has to be stared and can be stared down by the defendant in complete defiance of British justice, of what we do over here in the British legal system, is insane and completely unfair to the victims. And the fact that in one of these cases the police, in my opinion, and I think you might come to the similar conclusion, was almost certainly pressured behind the scenes to bring the case to a US court because they knew that a US court would almost certainly just give him a slap on the wrist and be lenient, even if they did find him guilty. And the fact that the other victim in this case was given terrible advice and not advised that that a US martial court, or whatever you want to call it, basically runs on very different systems to what a UK court does, does a complete disservice to her as well, and no doubt was incredibly traumatizing to her. And this has to change. We need to know what exactly the police force, the Suffolk police force, who decided to hand over the investigation to the US. We need to know what went down with that, what that conversation looked like, to see just kind of what pressure was exerted to them to get that to happen. And there has to be a complete investigation into the other police force and the independent advisor and the independent advisor as well, to make sure that they are actually going to give people accurate information as to what a US court-martial actually entails and what it actually looks like. Because from what has been described and from the facts we know of this case, it is pretty awful. And these people were not given the justice that they deserve. This US court-martial basically just gave this serial sexual assaulter just a slap on the wrist and then off you go. 10 months? Are you fucking kidding me? Oh. But anyway, thank you very much for listening to this kind of little rant today, and I will catch you in the next video. So, see you later.